One of my favorite sayings of Christ is, "Wisdom is justified by her children." In other words, outcomes are important. Get your coffee. I began regularly teaching the Bible nearly 22 years ago. At the time, I was teaching a group of junior high kids, youth ministry. To all the youth ministers out there, God bless you. Especially those with the junior high youth ministry. Junior high youth pastors, that's a challenging place to be. In writing his pastoral letters, the Apostle Paul always opened with grace, mercy, and peace. Most of his letters open with grace and peace, but to Titus and Timothy, Paul said grace, mercy, and peace. I think young pastors need a lot of God's mercy because pastoring junior hires is humbling. Very much so. Anyway, I remember early on coming to Paul's New Testament exhortation, imitate me as I imitate Christ. He also said in the same book, I urge you, imitate me. And right before Paul wrote those words, he says, for though you might have 10,000 instructors in Christ, yet you do not have many fathers in Christ. I have begotten you through the gospel, and then I urge you, imitate me. So I remember reading and teaching that and thinking at that point, I'm 19 years old. I hope there is a day that I can say, without kind of blushing, imitate me. I had no problem saying with Paul, be imitators of God as dear children, but the idea of telling people to imitate me, it seemed at that point in my life to be a bit of a stretch. And in all candor, it was a bit of a stretch at that point. But there should come a time, because of your imitation of God and those that follow him faithfully, that you should have a life that can serve as an example and a pattern for others. How do you get there? How do you get to the point where you truly can say to people, imitate me as I imitate Christ? Hebrews chapter 6, verse 12 says, imitate those who through faith and patience inherit the promises. In other words, follow the pattern of those who through faithfulness, reliability, endurance, and steadfastness are reaping the benefits and the blessings of their committed practice. Follow wisdom that is justified by her children. Outcomes are important. It's amazing to me that many of the biggest influencers of our day, and that's the new name for role models, have nearly zero life experience. Certainly not enough to show some productive outcomes that prove that their ideas and philosophies and worldviews are actually wise. The wisdom of an idea or a philosophy is revealed by what it produces. What are the long-term effects of continuing in that practice? I think it was Charles Barkley years ago, long time ago, back when he was still playing basketball, did I think it was a Nike commercial, and he said, I am no role model. At least he had the humility to recognize that he wasn't really a role model. He was a good basketball player, and maybe you could follow his pattern for doing a layup, but to follow his pattern for life, he knew, or at least it seemed like maybe he knew, that the better role models were hopefully parents, and that people shouldn't look necessarily at him to pattern their life after him. Now, maybe years later, I don't know where he's at this point and what he's doing. Maybe he's got a life that's worthy of emulation. I have no idea. But there are a lot of influencers, role models today, who just don't have enough of a life to show that their philosophy has produced good outcomes. It might be tweetable, likable, or shareable, but it's not exactly emulatable. I remember about 15 years ago, there were a few up-and-coming pastors who, they were about 5 to 8 years older than me, and they were getting a lot of Christian press, and some of them were even getting some of kind of the non-Christian secular press, I guess you could say, and they were edgy and they were trendy, and several of them, in the long run, lost their churches, and one of them took his life. A lot of people followed their example, their tone, their look, their methodologies. Outcomes are important. Imitate those who through faith and patience inherit the promises. And that faithful endurance, it requires time. I have to be honest, I still feel weird saying imitate me, but I feel like I'm shooting closer to the target than I was 22 years ago. Wisdom is justified by her children. That's something to think about as you pour your coffee this morning, and I hope it's not decaf. We'll see you next time.